Hi, good morning. Welcome to our session this morning from RELEX. So just when you come into one of these few familiar faces and you start to think, I work with that person, have they just come to one of these presentations before? And I get distracted thinking about that and forget what I'm supposed to be doing. So this morning we're going to talk about utilizing AI for your end-to-end supply chain orchestration. So for some reason, I felt compelled to do an introduction slide for myself, which I don't normally do. But yeah, Scott Curtis, 2 stints at RELEX over the last 15 years. All of that 15 years in supply chain planning of some sort or another. And these days in the field with the pre-sales team for manufacturing. So making sure that we've got the right understanding of our customers' needs and representing our technology in the best way to meet those needs in the field across EMEA and APAC. So just a quick introduction to RELEX before we go into the main presentation for anybody that doesn't know. So growing business with actually 700 now. This slide is a little bit old. 700 customers in the consumer goods value chain across primarily retail, but also a growing base in manufacturing these days as well. Approximately 130 of that 700 are on our manufacturers as well as retailers. So we've always had a very heavy focus on the fast-moving goods, the complex to plan, scale elements of the supply chain, and that's where we continue to really focus, but obviously expanding the focus a little bit more to how we get the consumer goods into the retailers as well as how we get them into the hands of consumers. And our manufacturing offering is represented here. So across the demand and supply balancing element, all the key areas you'd expect us to be in, but really driven by that demand planning and sensing on the right-hand side. That's where we've invested heavily over the last 20 years, and particularly in machine learning in the last several years to really lead in consumer goods forecasting, and that's really powering what we can do in the rest of the supply chain planning space for a manufacturer, right through distribution, production, purchase planning, inventory, and then layering on the collaboration and IBP processes and such that you can do once you've got that solid base in your end-to-end planning. So what we're going to go through today a little bit is the changing world of supply chain and how AI factors into that. Why current planning approaches fall short, why there is such opportunity to improve them with AI, what we see as the new way of doing that, some customer examples from the real world, and then some final notes on how to develop an AI-first mindset in your supply chain function in your businesses. So I've been using this slide for about 18 months now, and it only gets more and more intense. So, this week was some tariffs we thought were happening and not happening, and some other tariffs are happening, and it almost becomes even harder than ever to keep up with it. But the only thing that's certain is these changes are continuous, and we have to be more ready than ever to mitigate the challenges and stresses that geopolitical decisions are putting on all of our businesses. But despite all of that, some things remain constant. Growth and revenue expansion are what all of our leaders are asking us to focus on. So the mission remains the same for all manufacturing businesses and retail businesses, despite the challenges that geopolitics puts on us. But a number of things that are changing in the market that we see happening, and this one's quite interesting. So this example I've used in several countries, and we've used it as RELEX, around the world. I'm not sure liquid death was quite the success in the UK that it was in other markets. I think I saw it in B&M the other day being sold through. But water in a can with some really good marketing has been incredibly successful in some markets. Reflects that consumers are not necessarily drinking alcohol the way they used to, but they're still looking for something that they want to be pictured with in their hand and they want to put on their social media, et cetera, et cetera. So consumers remain as unpredictable as ever in what they're going to like. Something that probably some people could have seen that maybe not everybody thought about, but a lot of companies are now having to rethink what their prepared meals look like for GLP-1 drug users. So, the Ozempics, Mounjaros, these things, people are experiencing vastly different appetites and ways of eating. They're looking to get more protein from smaller portions. A few years ago, protein focus was for the bodybuilders and the really fitness-focused people. Now, people that are eating vastly less on these drugs are looking for protein-heavy meals as well. So change in the go-to-market of big organizations to meet that. And then companies like Coca-Cola, who focused primarily on certain niches, are now expanding into things like prebiotic soda, recognizing that the consumers are wanting healthier and more thought out products and things like that. And then, of course, the AI factor doesn't change. One thing that has changed is there's so many different memes that we can put into this presentation every week. So everybody wants AI, whether your leadership is in a manufacturer, a retailer, or even a tech company. Everything needs to be AI driven, but not necessarily the people asking for it know exactly what they want to be AI driven. They just want AI in everything. And some of the challenges that we solve as technology companies remain the same. It's just what we're teeing up AI to do afterwards is what changes slightly. AI adoption has been massively accelerating compared to the past. I was looking over this slide, even though I've presented it many times before, and I was thinking about Uber, which has their 70 months to 100 million users. I remember first reading about Uber in a paper magazine and probably riding in an Uber a year later. If we look now, right on the right, ChatGPT went to 100 million users in 2 months. So the scale at which these things reach people is incredible. It's not years that we have to plan these innovations over. It's months now, and we're seeing that now with the rise this year, particularly of generative AI and AI agents in everyone's daily work. Inside our industries and in any type of industry as well. It's only getting faster and faster. Another example of that was DeepSeek, which was the Chinese sort of large language model that launched last year, and in a matter of hours became the most liked app on this Hugging Face platform where developers share their ideas. The fastest liked thing in history, and it became that in a couple of hours from launch. So change is getting faster and faster in technology. I was also reflecting on this from last year. If anybody saw this, probably about this time last year, it was launched as a job advert in San Francisco. And if you can't quite see the detail on there, it's advertising a job. You might not notice at first glance it says AI agents only in the job title, and it also only pays $15,000 a year, which is not very much in San Francisco. But then you realize this actually is not for a human. This is a job advert for an agent. First time I saw this, I was like, oh yeah, that's a bit of a gimmick maybe, but it looks a lot different now, doesn't it, when we're thinking about how agentic planning is in everything we do. Certainly technology companies that you're going to meet here today are talking about how AI agents are something that they can offer you to augment your planning teams, augment your supply chain execution teams. So it's real. It became real quite quickly, and it's where we're going to continue to move, I think. But despite all of that, companies are reporting that, 70% of companies saying that their employees are lagging in the adoption of AI tools. I think we see that. I work for a technology company, and we see that as well. Not all of our teams are necessarily fully embedded in AI as we would expect. And only 70% of companies have trained less than 1 in 4 of their workforce. So these tools are appearing. They're out in the market. People are using them. But historic ways of building training material, new tools, you might take a year to build training material for. Those models aren't fitting anymore. So we can't wait for training. We can't wait for adoption to take many years. So there's definitely a misalignment in how all companies are executing in training and onboarding of people and the increased advancement of technology. But some things, as I say, don't change. Supply chain decisioning remains a juggling act between inflation, resilience and efficiency, human intelligence and AI, and inventory costs, capital costs. The problems remain the same. It's just how fast we're expected to solve them that are changing. And when we look at our own research at RELEX into our customers and prospective customers and partners, 60% are prioritizing supply chain and inventory optimization investments. And what's really interesting is the 3 emerging technology areas that are highlighted. So 60% almost saying they want to see generative AI become more prevalent in their business, 43% predictive AI. But then the last one I think is the most interesting. 34% want to focus on cloud-native solutions. We've been talking about cloud-native solutions for 20 years, and 34% of businesses still see it as their top investment. So perhaps they're not running as fast into this new technology as we might think. Maybe grounds us a little bit when we think about how fast technology actually is adopted. So why do we see current planning approaches falling short? So when we look across the customers we talk to, existing customers, prospective customers. That's how we learn about what we're doing and how we improve our offering to the market. We see planning assumptions and policies that don't affect the real world. So systems, particularly perhaps IBP, S&OP systems and processes that are built and take a lot of time to build, assumptions can quickly become outdated across teams, and by the time we're reacting to something, the world has already changed. We see a lot of algorithms in place that don't learn and flex as the business changes. So the go-to-market changes. We just saw how fast consumer tastes change, how much technology changes, but perhaps the planning tools in place are not adapting with that. And then information silos. So data just not in consistent ways across businesses, not being able to connect two different parts of your business, the demand team and the production planning team, or people responsible for inventory, people responsible for demand, looking at different data sets across businesses. This is still very prevalent across the businesses we talk to. And of course, a lot of changes and adjustments to these systems requires a lot of work in coding and IT, and IT can always be a bottleneck to these things when we need to rely on specific experts to make those kind of changes. So what does that lead to? It leads to this sort of plan drift. So you start an initiative, and this is probably a bit small actually to see, but you start an initiative and you have a planned business value that will be delivered. What actually happens is that realized value curve is a lot flatter after the initial uplift. The anticipation only grows, and you get a big gap between what you expected to get and what you actually got. That leads to users and stakeholders not trusting the solution of the initiative that's been adopted. A lot of confusion, and then you can see on there some post-it notes, some folders, some Excel, and this is how Microsoft Excel remains the #1 supply chain planning tool in the world. Ultimately then leading to KPIs not being met. So a lot of problems that we still see in the market from big investments, big initiatives that have been undertaken. And then we're always trying to find a meme that works for this. It's so hard to find a meme that works in multiple countries. So what do we see as the new way to plan? How can we do something better about this? So one of the cores, or it's actually 3 things, but the core focus of how we want to develop our solutions for manufacturing in particular are around adaptive, autonomous, and aligned planning. So the system should be adaptive. You shouldn't be putting in a system, one of my colleagues likes to say, pouring concrete. You shouldn't be pouring concrete that can never be changed. You should be building something that can flex and change with your business as priorities change, as needs change, as resources change. So that means you need something that can use demand sensing, can sense what's happening in the market and react to it, giving you new plans as you need them. It needs to have algorithms that learn from data, learns from patterns, changes what's expected based on what's happening. But then you also need a system that you can configure to new situations. So if you acquire a brand or divest a brand or have some new locations or a totally different way of working, you need to be able to have a system that can work with that. We have a number of customers using our platform that had to make vast changes to their business in the COVID times, which amazingly is 5 years ago now, but still feels like yesterday to most of us. Suddenly having to develop an online business where they didn't have one before. In inflexible systems, that probably means you're planning that in Excel, or you're buying a new system to plan that new online business. But if you've got a flexible system, you can reconfigure how it works to meet the needs of that new business unit you've just created. And also, you need to be able to continuously upgrade systems. When you're working with the latest technology, from technology, we always have a sort of very technology-focused and biased point of view. We talk to people in the market who are using a 10-year-old version of something. We think that's absolutely crazy. How can you be using a 10-year-old version that's not been upgraded? Upgrades should be continuous and constant, and you should always be using the latest thing that's available, and providers should be making those latest things always available to you in whatever you're using. Autonomy. So we want systems to drive automation and autonomy amongst users. So not relying on users to sort of wind the handle to make decisions, automate as much as possible. And that's really where agentic AI is going to layer on that. There'll be more on agentic AI in a moment, but making data-driven recommendations, flagging exceptions. So the humans are spending time with the exceptional circumstances, looking at the things that the machine couldn't anticipate rather than the day-to-day normal things that can be quite well predicted and handled. Being able to actually use real optimization. So we say real optimization because the word optimization has been badly used by everybody, including us and every other software vendor. actual mathematical optimization to solve problems, linear programming, multiple mixed constraint optimization, so you're finding the right solution to the problem. And then granularity at scale, so being able to plan, whether you're a retailer planning 25,000 stores with 40,000 products in each of them, or whether you're a manufacturer looking to plan some of your customer stores individually to explain their buying behavior, their ordering behavior, you should be able to work at that scale these days with technology. That should be table stakes for planning in our industry. The final element being aligned, so not having a system that is used by only one team or only one element of the business. We want a system that works for everybody, and different stakeholders can be cross-functionally collaborating in that tool, linking planning with execution and allowing simulation across the end-to-end of your business. So these are the core elements that we see to a modern planning tool. And really what we want to be doing is moving this user away here from this sort of depressed looking guy who looks quite confused because he's manually doing everything and manually winding the handle to make plans happen, to the users becoming more like leaders, and they lead the AI agents, lead the AI function, AI elements of the solution. It's almost like your users all get a promotion to be managers of AI agents rather than being doers themselves. And obviously the guy looks a lot happier, and Rebot, which is our AI agent, looks really happy with that guy in that picture. So how do we see that actually working, right? So every vendor you talk to, I think whether you're buying a supply chain planning system, or whether you're buying a camera, a doorbell, you get talked to about how much AI is in the solution these days. This is what we mean when we talk about AI. So we have a platform that's been built to be scalable. It's used in-memory data, proprietary database that we built 20 years ago. It's been the core of our platform for 20 years. We then have what we call specialized AI, and what I like to call the secret sauce. So what we've been doing for a long time, the machine learning forecasting, the optimization for production planning and distribution planning, predictive inventory for working out where stock actually is in your business. These type of things that are focused on real problems, built by experts to solve that particular problem, is what we're calling specialized AI. And that's some stuff that's existed for a long time. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about how we get hung up on the term AI, perhaps more than we should. But these things are artificial intelligence, because machines are helping humans to make decisions artificially in a way they couldn't otherwise. So it is AI, whether it was invented 20 years ago or 2 months ago. But then really on top of that specialized layer, there is AI agents. So these are autonomous problem solvers sitting in the platform, helping your users, working with your users, almost like additional team members. These AI agents, I like to think of them as you could hire 100 interns and give them all very little jobs to do. That is quite expensive these days. These AI agents are doing the same thing. So you have an AI agent that just looks at what are the out of stocks on this category and report on why they are. Somebody could do that, but it's now an AI agent can do that for you. It doesn't need holiday, it doesn't need a break. It works 24 hours a day looking at the data and telling you what's happening with the data. And there's many, many use cases for these agents. I think we're really just scratching the surface in what they're going to be and what they're going to do over the next few years, but really agentic planning is going to be a massive topic in the coming years. And then there's Gen AI assistants, right? So we've all used ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot by this point, or I'd say at least 80% of the room probably has. You want these in your planning tools as well to answer questions about how do I do this, where do I find this data, what does this screen mean, those questions that you might have to ask in the past to a colleague, another user, or call a support desk. AI assistants are there to do those things for us in most technologies now. I mentioned the specialized AI and named a few elements of it. If I click through these a little bit, I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is an example of where we can identify specialized AI across the end-to-end value chain that we've been doing for some of these cases for almost 20 years. So specialized AI has been around for a long time, and there's a rich amount of it. So customer examples from the real world. So how do we actually work in practice? This diagram is very crude, but I think we really like to use it because it's basically what are we doing in manufacturing at RELEX? We're balancing demand and supply. So if we think about internal and external signals that drive demand to begin with, one of the areas that's really, really a hot topic at the moment we're finding is retail connected planning. So particularly the bigger vendors, manufacturing vendors, sort of the big consumer goods companies really want to talk to us about how do they get closer to their retailers, because we have a system that's in many of the retailers. It's operating that retail scale. they want us to help them to plan like their retail customers plan, and that's what we mean by retail connected planning. And of course, there is this, we didn't invent this. This is a common thing that's been around for a long time. 2% improvement in on-shelf availability is 1% top-line growth. So it's massive opportunity to improve on-shelf availability by planning more closely together. So Mester Bakeren is an example of a customer doing this. They are a bakery in Norway. They bake fresh bread every day for Rema stores, Rema 1000, supplying bread every day to these stores, 680 of these stores across Norway. And the bread basically lasts for a day. So every day it's baked, put on the shelf. What's not sold is thrown away every day. They plan each of those 680 stores individually, so each of their 9 bakeries can bake exactly what they need. So this is a prime example of retail connected planning. They're taking the POS data from Rema. They're using that to generate forecasts on the store level, so they know exactly what they need and when they need it. And I talked about this being a hot topic for the bigger ones, the P&Gs, the Unilevers, etc. Mester Bakeren is not in that category. They're a smaller organisation, but they're very crucial, of course, to Rema. They're able to use the technology at this scale, despite being a smaller business. So it's really something that anybody is able to do, and their accuracy is over 95% these days with that forecasting. So this is a way of sort of bringing to life that demand planning and sensing. I'm not going to labour this too much for time reasons, but this is the core demand planning and sensing that these guys are using. Another manufacturer doing this, sort of much bigger in their scale, is Samworth Brothers, who are planning. Probably everybody knows Samworth Brothers if you're in food supply chain in the UK, but across 16 sites, providing a lot of the ready-made foods, some packaged foods as well, like Serene and Higgity Pies, but mainly own brand things for retailers in the UK. Across 16 sites, they wanted to really get a single way of doing demand planning. And this number actually keeps increasing every time they tell the story, but they've now replaced 176 Excel spreadsheets with their RELEX implementation. I can't imagine 167 spreadsheets and 15 different methods across 16 sites as well. So there was not a lot of cohesion in how they were demand planning. So they've been able to put all of that into RELEX. They're achieving really high forecast accuracy. Something that we didn't necessarily anticipate in the initial business case that they saw was a 70% reduction in couriered raw materials. So 70% less of the time they need somebody to be doing a courier delivery of a raw material, which has been a massive saving because, of course, that's really expensive to do that. And the favorite metric from this is they were pretty good in their forecast accuracy in their 176 spreadsheets and 15 models, but the team were all working 60 hours a week. And Samworth Brothers is a very people-driven business, and they all love the business. But if you can give people 5-10 hours a week back, hopefully they're down to more like 40 hours a week now. It's a massive impact on your team and their quality of life, as well as an impact on the KPIs of the business. So they'll continue to expand their use now into master planning and other elements of planning. On the other side, so rules and constraints that restrict the supply into the business to meet the demand. We talked about having real optimization, being able to actually use mathematical optimization in your planning. We need to be able to bring into your system all of these different constraints, and this is just a small example. You've got physical constraints on line capacities, what can go on what line, you've got allergens, you've got what's available, you've got resources, who can work on what line, can 2 people work on this line, can 1 person at a time only work on this area. Critically in the UK a lot at the moment, what agency labour is available, how quickly can you get that agency labour in. All of those constraints you need to build into your optimization so you can make that accurate plan. And that's just for a business that's maybe taking raw materials and putting them together. If you start to think about businesses like protein, where you need to take a carcass and break it into things, so you've got that push into the business that then gets broken into many possible things, becomes even more complex. So businesses like Finsbury, who had a massive reduction in working capital and 5% improvement in their service level, they're actually serving similar customers to Samworth Brothers in a similar way. They're making a lot of own brand baked goods for the UK retail market. They were able to do 2 times as much work with the same resources by planning better in RELEX. Ecro is another example. These guys have the carcass balancing problem, so they're taking about 1,800 cows into the business. 1,800 cows sites supplied and slaughtered daily. Of course, they're never the same weight, grade, condition, etc. And there are 1,500 different ways they can cut that carcass. So the system needs to be aware of that, needs to plan for that, so they can meet the demand without making, too much stock they can't sell. There's no point turning everything into a premium steak if there's only so much market for steaks. They need to be meeting the demand of what's possible. System can guide them to make things that they can store, so maybe mince can be frozen if they have excess, all these type of things, automatically planned, so they don't need to be relying on the brilliance of a few people and a few Excel sheets to do that. So rounding out, how do we think about, maybe this doesn't relate completely to a supply chain planning implementation, but how do you think about having an AI-first mindset in your organization? So, we talk to a lot of customers and everybody talks about data. Our data is not perfect. Well, nobody's data is perfect. This sounds like a pre-canned joke, but it's a real story. One company ever has told me in 15 years that they had good data, and they didn't. They had the worst data. Nobody's got good data. Everyone thinks their data is worse than it is. There's always somewhere you can start. You can start somewhere, you can grow, you can learn, you can adapt, especially with how fast AI technology can adapt these days. Lead with practical use cases. So I think this is really crucial, especially when you think about that meme of CEOs saying they want AI and they don't know what they want to do. We can do AI for the sake of AI, but it's better to lead with practical use cases. Find a problem you've got, find an AI solution that solves a problem you've got. Don't start with doing something you don't necessarily need to do just so you can say that you're doing it. I mentioned earlier, AI is an umbrella term. We don't get hung up on debates about what is and what isn't AI. If it's a computer making a decision for somebody, it's AI, right? And whether it's agents or generative or whatever, doesn't matter. It's making someone's life easier with technology. It's AI. Doesn't need to be debated, I don't think. Take quick feedback, learning loops. So link between decisions and execution. This can be by putting people specifically into tiger teams to focus on these initiatives so they can quickly iterate and decide on what's happening, measuring the output and implementing that on further changes. Start small. I think there's probably links to some of these other things, but don't try and plan everything. Don't wait for the data to be perfect. Don't wait for the perfect use case. Start with what you can start with and then scale it. Consider establishing an AI analytics center of excellence. I think we're already seeing in a lot of businesses people adopting AI titles. Certainly in our business, we've got a lot of people moving into sort of AI-focused roles. How does AI speed up the sales process? How does AI speed up our delivery process? These type of things. Consider where you can do that in your business. Identifying people that are great at these things, so they can live in that role and implement them into the business. And then the last is invest in people, right? To keep the workforce loyal and engaged. I think everybody can do a lot more to get their teams upskilled in AI and thinking about AI and moving in the right direction with that. Any thoughts? I don't like to say any questions anymore because I don't like that isn't a question, right? It's a thought. So yeah, happy to take thoughts for the last 2 minutes, but I'm going to put on the screen before we do that a plug for our event next week. If you are in London and you would like to come and talk to approximately 270 other supply chain practitioners about their experience with RELEX or their anticipated experience of working with us, chance to do that. There's some presentations from customers, some presentations from our executives and our technology leaders, and just a chance to network and meet people. I'll leave that on there while I take any questions that there might be, any thoughts that there might be. I think the biggest thing or the biggest risk of not being ready is knowing what you want to solve. Particularly if we do some big initiatives, going to see people and we're going to transform their business. If you've got an idea of here's what this department wants to get out of this, here's what this department wants to get out of this, and have that sort of scoped out, mapped out, that can be really valuable in order to. It makes it easier for every business like us that you might talk to explain how we can help, and it means that you can really measure the difference between us and the other companies you might talk to as well. In terms of starting a new implementation, so it's a good point. So if you've got, depending what AI systems you're using, if you've got, Copilot from Microsoft, have it summarize all the email conversations you're having. What things are we discussing most in about demand planning in our emails? Copilot could probably go and do that for you and actually tell you what your biggest requirements are. Maybe your teams wouldn't actually come up with that same list, but the data's there. Something like Copilot can comb through that and find it for you. and really drive that requirements building exercise. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's starting in a really focused way with the right stakeholders on that initial initiative to make sure they are sort of the people that are able to spot those things. We can use systems to surface these data issues. But one thing we've actually been doing a lot recently is a data detective exercise. So before we get to the point of signing a contract to do a piece of work with somebody, actually a week or so to actually look at the data and surface the problems using our people that do this, for full-time for a living. They know the problems they've seen elsewhere. They can find them quite quickly in your data and help to surface that and mitigate some of those concerns into the project phase. So your question is, how do we, when they're already achieving quite high, how do we go into the situation? It's a good question, because there is always a bit of a risk that, hey, if we get this wrong, we might get worse. But we're usually pretty confident in achieving high numbers. And for those guys, it was all about how do you get the same, well, they actually got improved numbers, but how do you get improvements that free up people's time? So it's almost like, I was thinking of my grandmother in the shop she used to run, right? She could keep 100% service level if she spent £1 million on stock. Anybody can solve the problem with raw effort. It's about doing it in a smarter way with less resources. I think we're over time. No one's waving at me, though, from the back. But yeah, thank you.